You are listening to the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. Before I talk about today's episode, I'm going to provide an update regarding oral surgery I underwent a couple of weeks ago. As some of you may know, I underwent a surgical procedure to remove my lower left wisdom tooth, which was the last of my wisdom teeth, and the procedure was successful. I have fully recovered from the procedure, and I feel the best I've felt in many years. For today's episode, which was the first one recorded after my tooth extraction, I had the opportunity to interview Kimberly Sullivan. Kimberly, who is originally from the United States but now lives in Italy, is the author of 3 fiction works, 3 Coins, Dark Blue Waves, and In the Shadow of the Apennines, with a short story collection titled Drink Wine and Be Beautiful, soon to be published. I'm here with Kimberly Sullivan, who is the author of 3 Coins, Dark Blue Waves, and In the Shadow of the Apennines. I might be mispronouncing the name of that mountain range.
That's a tough one. It's the Apennines.
Apennines, okay. Well, Kimberly, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for inviting me. Wonderful to be here today.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Great, sure. Yes, my name is Kimberly Sullivan. I am originally from New York, but I've been living for many years in Italy. I'm living in Rome, and I am an indie author of multiple genres, but always within the, let's say, the umbrella of women's fiction. So, I enjoy writing a lot, and I'm very happy that I write quickly, but I edit quite slowly. So I have written, 3 novels, and I have my 4th, which is a short story collection, because I love writing short stories, and that's coming out in May.
What is the hardest part of adjusting to living in Italy for you as someone who is originally from the United States?
Well, I've actually lived abroad a lot. So I've also lived in France. I lived in a country that doesn't exist anymore, Czechoslovakia, which is split up now. So I was in the part that was the Czech Republic, and in Austria. So I had lived in quite a few places before I moved to Italy. But it's a pretty wonderful place to live, Aaron. I have to say, no complaints. I enjoy living here, and I get back often to the U.S. to visit.
Now, before I go into my next question, I'm going to briefly explain the 1993 breakup of Czechoslovakia to any listeners that might not be that familiar with 1990s world history. In 1993, the former country of Czechoslovakia was split between the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic, or Slovakia.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my next question is, without spoiling too much of 3 Coins, Dark Blue Waves, and In the Shadow of the Apennines, what are each of those books about?
Sure. Well, my debut novel is 3 Coins. That's contemporary women's fiction with some romantic elements. And that's 3 expatriate women who meet. They're living in Rome. They're from America, and they're living in Rome. And they meet off-season. They're all going through difficult periods of their life, and they meet at a beach resort, but in the off-season. So they're kind of thrown together. And they actually meet over a film, which is a 1954 film, a big Hollywood production called 3 Coins in the Fountain, which is about 3 American women who move to Rome and wind up forming this friendship. So it's an unlikely friendship that winds up being exactly what they need at that period of their life. So it allows them to kind of get themselves back on track and kind of, able to get their messy lives in order again. And my second novel is Dark Blue Waves. And that is a line from a 19th century poem by Lord Byron. And that's a time travel novel because I absolutely love Jane Austen. So that's about an American woman who goes to study in Bath in the United Kingdom. She's studying 19th century literature and she loves Jane Austen. So this is a Jane Austen seminar. And while she's there, she has an accident and she winds up traveling back to her own beautiful building that she's living in during the this program in Bath, but she's in 1813, so she wakes up in 1813. And of course, in theory, she's studied this, she knows it on the page, but everything is different when you have to live that way and not be unmasked as an imposter. So she actually, even though she knows a lot about the time, she's constantly getting herself into trouble, trying to keep anachronisms out of her language and everything. So that one I had a lot of fun writing because I love the time. I love 19th century literature, so that was a fun one. And then my third is the In the Shadow of the Apennines, and that takes place in a lovely region in Italy, which is called Abruzzo. It's a mountainous region to the east of Rome, and until recently was also a very poor region. But it's wonderful in the mountains there, and there's an American woman in my contemporary story who moves to a mountain village and tries to break into mountain society. She wants to restart her life, but she is a little bit messy with social media. She's writing a lot of not very nice posts about her neighbors and thinking they won't discover it. And she winds up getting discovered and kind of shunned in the town. But in this period, she discovers in her cottage a lot of journals that were written by a past resident who had lived there in the early part of the 20th century, so the lead up to World War I. And this is a shepherdess, an Italian woman who had lived through a devastating earthquake that actually did happen in that region and was awful. I mean, so many people died, there was so much destruction, and she learns a lot about the history and things that she didn't understand and the resilience of the people and what a difficult life it is. And it winds up aside from bringing to life the history of the time of that region, it makes her understand a lot more about the region and about herself. So that was kind of fun playing with a dual timeline of historical and contemporary. And so those are my three. And then my next one will be Italy based, but it's a short story collections contemporary.
In May, I believe, your short story collection, Drink Wine and Be Beautiful, will be released. What
Correct.
types of short stories are going to be included in your upcoming collection?
So that's another title, by the way, I should say, Aaron, that I borrowed from a far more talented author. That's from the British author E.M. Forrester. So when he says drink wine and be beautiful, he's speaking about the Italians, actually. He's talking about when they travel from the northern Europe and move into Italy, where the people drink wine and be beautiful. And so I decided to use that for the title because most of my stories take place either in Italy with expatriates or Italians, women in Italy, or Italians who are traveling abroad. And so just lots of slices of life, things, really stories of women and various aspects from friendship to love to tragedy to changes in life. But I think in the end it's a lot of hope in there in all of the stories, even when they're a little bit more on the tragic side, let's say.
A few days ago, you gave a preview of a book that you're currently working on. And that preview, I think, was posted to the blog on your website. And that book is going to be titled Rome's Last Noble Place. Is that correct, or is that just a working title at this point?
Well, it is a working title, but I think it actually will because Rome's Last Noble Palace, because it is an actual real palazzo, which is the word in Italian, which translates to palace, but it's these big buildings that were built by the noble families. And this was the last one that was built in Rome. And then afterwards came World War One, and of course things changed a lot in Europe, right? People weren't building these big noble palaces anymore; they couldn't afford to. So it is centered around there, and similar to In the Shadow of the Apennines, it is a dual timeline with contemporary and historical. And because I love this idea of being influenced by the past, and particularly because I write women's fiction, so women being influenced by women in the past, this one also has a ghostly element, let's say, about the story. So it is definitely a woman who's influenced by a woman who lived in this building over a century earlier.
Now, are all your books self-published, or all your books traditionally published, or are some self-published and others traditionally published?
I think that we have something in common, Aaron. I think that I see that you're also self-published, correct?
Yes, yeah, my
Yes.
first ebook that I wrote back in 2019 was self-published. I am going to note that once I start publishing more books, I'm going to take my first ebook totally off the market, but not before then.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, no, I love the self-pub. I know that people feel differently about it, but I was very drawn to self-publishing, to indie publishing. I think it's an exciting yeah, I just think it's changing a lot, the market, and for my needs it works out very well because I write fairly quickly. I have a job during the day and I like doing this in the evening and on weekends, and I like being able to yeah, to do this myself and to have control over it. So I enjoy the indie publishing route.
Now, you mentioned a little bit about this, that you like to write quickly and edit slowly, but if you have a typical writing routine, what is that like for you?
It's different because I tend to go between projects, which I don't think is the best thing. So now I'm trying to actually just write through one project on its own rather than dipping in and out. So that I've been doing, but I really like the creative part. I sit down and quite quickly go through the first draft, and then the issue is more. Then I send it out to beta readers. Then I get a lot of corrections, ideas, things that should be changed, things that weren't clear. Then I go back and I edit it again. And then I send it out to an editor with whom I've been working. And then I get it back and then I re-edit and then I send it out to a proofreader. So there is a process, but I just love personally, I love that first creative, spew of energy and getting it out.
Now, I didn't have this question written down, but are you fluent in Standard Italian, one of the many regional dialects or languages in Italy, or both?
Well, you actually raise a very good point because yes, I am. I am fluent in Italian. I've been living here for years, and I did my master's program over here. And I'm married to an Italian with half Italian children. So yes, I am certainly fluent in Italian. But what you say is absolutely correct that there are so many dialects in Italy, and it changes so much. So when I first came here, I did my master's degree in Milan in the north, and I was very comfortable because I had studied and I had worked, but within that area. So when I moved to Rome, and it was a completely different dialect, and I was having difficult time when people spoke a little bit stronger. And then when you travel to other parts of Italy, it can be quite different. So it is actually it's a good question with these dialects. I don't think everyone understands that when they learn the language and then they come over here, they have to find when people speak a standard Italian, but when they speak together, maybe they'll speak standard Italian, but then when they speak together, they can speak in dialect. So it can be a bit challenging.
And there are actually some languages in Italy other than Italian that are languages in their own right. A couple examples, I think, being Sardinian, which is spoken on the island of Sardinia, that is
Absolutely.
Closer to Latin than Italian, and Sud-Tyrolese, which is actually a German dialect. It's spoken in South Tyrol, where a lot of Italy's athletes in the Winter Olympics come from.
Absolutely. And yes, that's a minority within Italy, and they learn two languages in school. And when you go there, you'll speak more German than Italian. Absolutely. And within that, since you're so well informed with the dialects, both on the side where of Sud Tirol, where that German dialect is spoken in Italian, they call it Alto Adige. They also speak Romansh. I don't know if you've heard about that. They speak Romansh both there and in some areas of Piedmont, and that's the fourth language of Switzerland, if you happen to know. They have, in Switzerland, they speak German, French, Italian, and Romansh, which is also a Romance language, but it's very different from the other Romance languages. So you can hear that in the mountain regions. It's actually very interesting. So you're right. It's a real it's a real Tower of Babel over here.
Yeah, I'm doing quite a bit of world building work for some of my fiction writing projects. And yes, like you, I do work on multiple writing projects at once. And I'm also doing a lot of world building for a lot of my fiction writing projects. And I've been watching YouTube videos about various languages around the world from channels like LangFocus, if you've ever watched that YouTube channel.
No, but interesting. I love linguistics. I mean, I really love the study of languages. It's so interesting.
Now, I have one final question. This one I had written down. Prior to writing your first book, you worked in journalism and government in the United States, the former Czechoslovakia, and the western part that's now called the Czech Republic, and in Austria. What type of work in those fields did you do, and what was that like for you?
Oh, well, that was really interesting time to be there. So especially with a lot of the journalism work that I was doing in now the Czech Republic, that was after the wall had come down. So I had started off working in radio and television stations in the U.S. And I was dedicated with the idea of working through television stations, the smaller stations, and working up. But I really wanted to move to Europe and be there because so much was changing. And I was almost 3 years in Prague, and that was the time that everything was changing from the former communist system to the free market economy. So it was fascinating. I mean, I'm going to be going to Prague for Easter. I still go back quite a bit, but it's a very different city at the time. So I worked both in radio programs, and I worked with television news over there. And I even did one program in Czech, a live program, which was super interesting. I couldn't do that today because I've forgotten so much of my Czech, but at the time it was kind of fun.
Well, Kimberly, you are a very interesting person, and I thank you wholeheartedly for appearing on the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron. I had a great time. Thank you.
As I referenced the LangFocus YouTube channel on here, I'm going to include a link to that channel in the text description of this episode, along with the link to Kimberly's author website. It was wonderful to interview Kimberly, and I wish her the best of luck with her short story collection. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at AuthorAAC and on Instagram at AACScribe. Copyright 2023, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.